and welcome to Funding with Trust, the podcast for people looking to have more impact in international development. Funding with Trust brings you candid conversations with top grassroots leaders in philanthropy and the non-profit sector on why supporting grassroots organisations is so important, what works and what doesn't, and best practices to help you make more impact in your philanthropic journey. And we continue to showcase the work of exceptional African grassroots organisations and hear from them on what can be done differently from donors and grantee organisations to cultivate lasting funding relationships. My name is John Deeks, and it's a great chance to say hello to our co-host, Eve O'Mala. Welcome to you, Eve.
Thank you, John. John, how are you today?
I'm very well, and I've learned a secret about you.
Oh, what's that?
You almost said a naughty word. I believe you have become a snake catcher.
Oh, no. Who told you that?
Yes. I just want to say,
out.
I believe you've moved to the country in Queensland, and you are having a little bit of a chat with our producer, Ian Mack, and you suddenly said, I've got to go, because there was some poor, defenceless little tiny snake in the corner. Tell me the story.
Oh, John, no one prepared me for living in the bush.
Now, excuse me.
I was excited.
Just back up a little bit. Where were you from originally?
Oh, so I've lived in the city all my life.
Oh, have you?
Right in the middle of a city.
Righto.
In an apartment.
Okay.
And suddenly I wake up and I want to live in the bush.
Right.
But I was not prepared for it.
No one told you that there are sort of snakes and spiders and other creatures that live in the country?
Have you heard of a saying that you hear what you want to hear? I didn't hear all of that.
So you're having a chat to Ian, and what happened?
Yeah, so I'm very serious. Ian and I are in the middle of a very serious conversation. And I turn to the window and here is a green snake.
Oh, a little tiny defenseless green snake.
Everything in me said, get your Apple Mac and throw it at that snake.
So how enormous was this snake? Like a python? Was it about 3 inches long?
No, I'm embarrassed to say it was a tiny snake, but I ran for my life.
And what happened? Did your beloved come and save you?
That's the picture I had. My beloved came by and looked at it. He's like, oh, only that. Bye. I've gone back to work. And I'm yelling, and you're going to call the snake catcher? Call the snake catcher. He's like, no, that doesn't need a snake catcher. But I tell you, I have not walked out of the house in that direction since then.
Oh,
I'm
Eve.
not about to.
No, Eve, you've got to be strong. You're living in the country now. You're a good country woman. You can get out there and get amongst it. So apart from your exploits being a country snake catcher, we've got a wonderful guest with a fantastic story coming up today. But I'd like to hear your proverb.
Oh, yes. And today, our guest is all about food.
About food, yes.
So I thought, let our proverb just be about food. There is a very famous African proverb that says, words are sweet, but they never take the place of food.
Words are sweet, but they never take the place of food. That is so true.
That is an Igbo proverb. Igbo is one of the largest ethnic groups in Africa, from Nigeria. So, to shed more light onto this proverb, it is, fine words do not produce food. You need to work with your hands to get food. And whatever you want cannot just be achieved by merely speaking. You have to work hard at it. You have to live your dream. You have to put action to your words. In fact, the simplified version of this would be actions speak louder than words. Actions is where the food is.
Yes, you're quite right. People say a lot of things, but actions speak louder than words. You are quite right. And today we were speaking to somebody who has put that into practice.
Exactly. We speak to a young lady, Wawira Njiru, who has gone beyond words. And if she hadn't acted on her words, many kids in Kenya would still be going to bed hungry every single day.
Wawira will be on the line right after this. Great to have your company on Funding with Trust. Here is another outstanding grassroots organisation from Tanzania. Rebecca Gilmy started Mishishana Initiative to advocate for girls' education and changes in discriminatory laws that were especially affecting girls and women. In 2016, the initiative won a landmark court ruling in Tanzania which raised the minimum age of marriage from 14 to 18. In addition to advocating for changes in discriminatory laws, Mishishana runs community platforms and school programs to address girls' issues and promote women and child protection rights. Welcome back, and you're listening to Funding with Trust with me, John Deeks, and Eve O'Mala. And Eve, who is our special guest today?
Our guest today is Wawira Njiru, the founder of Food for Education. I've been privileged to know Wawira for the last 5 years, and I have actually visited her work in Kenya. Wawira left Kenya after high school to study nutrition at the University of South Australia. While in Australia, she mobilized funds to feed poor kids in public primary schools in Kenya and moved back when she was done with her degree, and that is how Food for Education was started. She's now feeding thousands of kids per day and has been successful getting the Kenyan government to support her work. She's also been successful raising funds internationally. Today, we're going to hear more about how she has done all of this. I cannot wait. Welcome to the show, Wawira.
Thank you, Eve, and thank you, John, for having me.
Congratulations initially on being UN Person of the Year as well. What a wonderful achievement. So you came to South Australia to study.
Yes.
Tell me why you chose South Australia and the university there.
It's actually a funny story. So I just finished high school. I was trying to get away from my parents as possible. And Australia was actually quite far from my parents who live in Kenya. And I also knew one person who lived in Adelaide, went to UniSA, and she was Kenyan, and I admired her very much. And so I decided to go where she was at. We weren't actually very close, but we became friends during that time when I went there.
And were you successful keeping the parents away?
I was successful, but then I missed them so much.
Oh.
So it was to my own detriment.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder. There you are.
Exactly.
So your initiative to assist those kids back in your homeland, how did that come about? What was the genesis of that?
Yeah, so when I went to Adelaide, I used to volunteer with a lot of organizations. I used to volunteer a lot when I was in high school in Kenya. So I continued with that. I volunteered with Oaktree. I volunteered with World Vision Australia. And I was looking for an organization that did something in the community that I grew up in, which is a small community here in Kenya. And I couldn't find one organization in Australia that was working in that community. And so that's when I decided to start something. And a school feeding program was recommended by a lot of teachers who were saying that was the biggest barrier that kids had here in Kenya. I sent my parents to all the public schools in our area to ask them questions. And when we got the answer that school feeding programs was what was really needed, and I was studying a degree in nutrition, it just all came into place. So actually, what was the strongest feedback from the schools was that kids were actually fainting in class. And some of them were sleeping, so, putting their heads on their desks. They don't want to learn in the afternoons because they hadn't eaten. And so I remember a very vivid visual that a teacher said that, a child would faint. They were a bit drowsy and in and out of consciousness. If they gave them a bit of glucose, that child would start waking up. So that child was just hungry. And so a lot of kids missing out on meals, a lot of kids running away from school at lunchtime to go look for food in the markets, in the streets. And then also kids, sometimes bringing unnutritious food from home that wasn't enough, that they'd eat at break time, and then they'd be hungry at lunchtime.
I don't know about you, but I can't function on an empty stomach, I'm just grumpy and just not happy. So, Wawira, what does a typical day for a primary school kid in Kenya look like? What do they do? What do they eat? And what are the circumstances back home for them?
So a typical day for a child is a parent, first of all, will be working a casual job. So a parent is waking up really early to go look for work. And so the child is waking up and their parent is probably not at home, and they have to maybe make tea for themselves. Sometimes it's black tea. If they're lucky, they have milk and they can make white tea. Sometimes they don't have a snack. Sometimes they have, a piece of bread or a piece of what they call mandazi, which is a dough cake here. And then, they'll walk a lot of kilometers to school if they live really far from the school that they're going to. And once they get to school, a lot of times they don't have anything packed that they brought to school. And so with Food for Education, if they're present in a school, a child will have access to that meal. But in the evening, when a child goes back home, if the parent didn't find work, they're not going to have dinner that evening. But if the parent found work, maybe they'll have a maize flour cake that we eat here. It's called ugali, and vegetables, and very little protein in their diet unless they're eating with us, where all our meals have very substantial amounts of protein. And the next day they wake up in the same cycle, waking up really early, your parents is not home most times, and then trying to go to school and do all the things. But also the parents are really living essentially day to day, trying to find an income for the next day and for that day for dinner.
And the typical parent of a kid you work with, how much do they earn per day roughly? Because it looks like without Food for Education, these kids won't have any food. They have no option. So how much do their parents earn?
So the typical parent, and this is per household. So if there are two parents, this is the collective income. If there's one parent, it'll probably be less. So it's around $70 to $100, depending on the kind of job, but also that's per month and that's per household. So that's to cover rent, to cover school utilities, to cover food, to cover everything, medical, everything.
So your program started feeding how many children initially, and how did you come to start the program?
So we started feeding 25 children a day initially when I did a small fundraiser in Adelaide. I raised a bit of money, which was $1,250, and then used that to build a makeshift kitchen and started feeding 25 children. We've grown significantly since then, first of all, by expanding, and we're building central kitchens and now provide meals to a network of around 31 schools, providing 33,000 children every single day.
Have you received any government support?
Yes, we have received forms of government support. For example, some of our central kitchens are constructed through local government financing, with partnerships with members of parliament in their constituencies. But as of now, we're trying to push towards consistent funding for school feeding to cover recurrent expenditure, which is the cost of purchasing food, the cost of cooking, that is usually not covered right now, except in arid and semi-arid areas in Kenya.
Wawira, being from Africa myself, I know it is not easy to receive support from a government. And we understand that governments can never fully cover what it costs to run these programs, but they will come on board and chip in here and there if they believe in what you are doing. So the fact that you're receiving support, from the Kenyan government and MPs means that they believe and have confidence in what you are doing. So what does it take to engage governments in Africa? You make it sound easy, but it is not easy. And I know it hasn't been easy for you. You have had to jump a few hurdles. So what has it taken for you?
So that's a very good question, Eve. So in terms of engaging government, the first challenge I had to counter was being undermined. So we started engaging government just when I was still studying and I was in my early 20s. And I remember going to a government office and saying that we feed 40 children a day, and the government person laughing us off, who was in charge of school feeding then, and saying that come back when you do more, because that's very insignificant to us. So that was one of the challenges in terms of government wants to see a level of scale, and they want to see a level of cross-cutting across different geographies, across different areas, that the solution that you're creating can reach multiple children. And so thinking about how do you meet government where it's at, and how do we understand different budget lines? How do we understand different initiatives to drive conversations? So I think that one of the challenges has been really, taking time to understand how government works and what motivates people in government, and how do we work with them to be able to create a better solution. Because I think that people in government, all the ones I've met at least, want to have some form of they want to do good and they want to do something meaningful with their jobs, with their positions. That's what everyone wants to do with their lives. And so it's just a matter of finding what is that easy win that you can give them and what are those ways that you can partner that give them benefit and give the children benefits.
And would a foreign NGO be as successful in engaging governments as you have within a similar time frame? Within a short time, you've managed to get members of parliament to pay for kitchens. And, we talk about local organizations and how they engage governments in ways that others don't. So have you seen the same success for foreign NGOs?
I think that it would have been difficult. So I think that a lot of trust also comes from, name familiarity, for example. Like when I was in Australia, no one could say Wawira. Therefore, it was more difficult. Not no one, but very few people could say that name. It was a difficult name for someone to think and pronounce.
Tell me about it.
I've been
so that
teaching
creates a barrier.
I'm so embarrassed. I am so embarrassed.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the things, in terms of like, there's a level of familiarity for local leaders where you're able to navigate, because these are the systems that we've grown up with. We've grown up navigating these government systems. And so when we're looking at, for example, how to work with members of parliament to fund kitchens, it's a much more different conversation, because a lot of times it's someone who knows someone who knows someone. It's those relationships that have been built from families, from, being in Kenya, from living in Kenya. And that's really what has been helpful for us in terms of looking at what are those relationships that have been leveraged. But also there's a familiarity with me and other people on my team going to government versus someone who's not from here or who may not have the experience here, as it would be if I went to government and tried to convince them to do something in Australia versus an Australian doing it. There's a very big difference there.
Well, of course, in Australia, you just have to get a politician and a camera and watch the money flow.
Yes. But also to get the camera, you kind of need to know the right places to go and the right people to talk to.
We'll make sure we get the press there. Don't you worry about that. But certainly in Kenya, a very different kettle of fish. So tell me about your trip to the US and how you, congratulations on being UN Person of the Year, and you met some pretty heavy hitters over there as well.
Yes, thank you. So the UN Person of the Year was a ceremony that was held to, honor the work that we've been doing here in Kenya, providing school meals to kids. The trip to the US, presenting at the Global Citizen Festival, was around the work that we've been doing as the prize winners of the inaugural Youth Prize, sponsored by Cisco at Global Citizen. And I got to present in front of 60,000 people in New York at Central Park, which is insane. But great opportunity, and also thankful to be the UN Person of the Year here in Kenya, honored by the UN here in Kenya.
Eve, this is another example that we talk about, and you certainly push this barrow so well. Local, small engagement with community. And when you think about feeding children, you're not only just helping them with their education, but their nutrition, of course, their whole welfare. It's a holistic approach, isn't it?
It is. And that investment in one kid could actually be what unlocks opportunities for the entire family and generations.
So true.
It is a ripple effect. Yeah. Now, Wawira, you are actually feeding 33,000 kids a day. That's a very big operation. Mm-hmm. Is that all from one kitchen? And how do you source all that food?
No, that's from 4 central kitchens right now. And they're located then mostly around Nairobi, but also within Mombasa, which is an area here in Kenya. We source that food centrally, so we source it locally and regionally as well, depending on seasons. So if something is not available in Kenya, sometimes we'll go to Uganda and around the region to source for produce. So we serve 4 main ingredients, which is maize, beans, rice, and lentils. And we add vegetables to all our meals, and we serve a fruit as well. So our vegetables and fruits are sourced within Kenya and locally. We source centrally for a lot of our produce. our groceries are sourced regionally in terms of where the kitchens are located because of maintaining freshness and ensuring that when they're being put in food and being served to children, they're still very fresh. So our procurement system is very elaborate to ensure that 33,000 kids get lunch every single day.
That's incredible. And how big is the team that prepares these meals and who makes the menus?
So primarily I made the first initial menus, and we've done some tweaks that now our kitchen managers and our team works on making tweaks. But mostly we remain consistent because we have a very strict cost policy. So we ensure that the meals are distributed at the lowest cost possible to ensure that parents who contribute 15 cents are able to meet that bulk of the cost of the meals that we produce. So that's 15 US cents, which is the equivalent of probably 20 Australian cents. Right now we have a team of just over 200,
Wow.
which is a huge team across different locations providing meals to children.
In Australia, we have, as you would know, food bank is a very popular thing where restaurants and other places that have, and the supermarkets, they won't throw out the food, but they'll try and direct it towards places that need it, Salvation Army and those sorts of things. Is that kind of a thing happening in Kenya as well?
You will find that, so for example, the difference in Australia is that in a supermarket, you'd want not ugly looking food, but in Kenya, there are different markets. So there's a high-end supermarket, there's a small shop which may sell ugly-ish tomatoes, but there are customers who would buy that. So in terms of like food use, we look at more food in terms of the client here is not as fussy, and there are different levels of clients, as unlike Australia, for example, where most people would be going to the supermarket to buy their produce or the grocery store. But for us at Food for Education, we do buy so for example, for farmers who would be farming for export or for use in supermarkets, we would be buying food that is considered ugly, that would not be sold to the higher end client, where we take it, like tomatoes, for example, because we're putting it in a stew. If it has 2 or 3 black spots, we'll buy that and be able to still put it in the stew and produce food.
So you're not only feeding kids, you're creating opportunities for farmers, you're providing employment to lots of people in your community, and you're getting parents to contribute 15 cents to meals, and you're able to track all of this using innovative technology, You track your operation to the T, and that's why you are able to tell us exactly what it costs. So when I visited, I saw all these kids wearing orange wristbands and happily tapping them onto a device before they were served food. Tell us more about these wristbands and how you use them to track the cost per meal.
Yeah, sure. So the orange wristbands, actually, the idea came also from Australia. I lived in Adelaide when we had bus tickets that changed to a Metro card when I was still there. And I remember, there were sort of like punch cards. The bus tickets used to be, I think, a form of punch cards where you'd only have 14 trips on it, versus the Metro card was something you could keep topping up. So initially, we used to collect cash from parents. We tried punch cards and all these different forms. But the Metro card transition that happened in Adelaide was really significant for me because I didn't have so many 14-day bus tickets in my wallet to get a bus, because I used to get a bus to uni. And so I thought about that same idea of how can we transition from cash of 15 cents, which is around 20 Australian cents, and then move to a more cashless solution, but a solution which doesn't need as many little pieces of paper. And especially because it has to work for children, it will be something that's exciting for children to have. So essentially what we created was called NFC, which is a technology in your credit card or debit card. The way you pay for something at a supermarket by just tapping is the same way that kids are able to access the meals. But the topping up doesn't happen through a bank as you would your credit or debit card. It happens through mobile money, which is very big in Kenya. And that topping up is done consistently. So parents are using Tap to Eat as a savings tool. If, for example, I mentioned that they're getting casual work, if they get work, they're able to top up as much as they want, and their kids are able to access meals the next day or any day, actually. So they can top up right before lunch. If they go out to work and find like a few hours of work, they're still able to top up that money. And that wristband is something that's durable. It's made from rubber. It's waterproof, and kids are able to come to school and they wear them to school, as you saw, Eve. And once it's lunchtime, they all run and they tap and get their lunch. We also offer the wristbands for free to ensure that kids are able to access the meals, and it's not a barrier for kids to access meals.
You must have had some wonderful stories from parents saying thank you so much for what you're doing for their children.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I'll give you a story. In Kenya, a lot of institutions have security guards outside, and you're required to write the name and where you work sometimes if you're going to visit someone. And so I remember, one time I was going to a place near one of our kitchens, and I wrote my name and the organization. So they didn't know my name, but when I said the organization, the parent asked me, because the parent was a security guard, said, "Oh, you do tap to eat." And a lot of parents know tap to eat because it's a payment method that they interact with. And I was like, yes. So I didn't say who I was. I was just like, I work at Food for Education. And she just said, "You saved me so much time. You ensure my kids have access to meals. Just thank everyone who works with you." And I was really proud of that moment because, it was not a preempted moment in any way, and I didn't expect it, but also very honest feedback about how Food for Education and Tap to Eat is making an impact in these parents' lives and her children.
Oh, that's so inspiring. So, Wawira, you have been quite successful raising money as a locally led organization. And, we know that many others are struggling to attract donor attention. So you've had way more success than we typically see for locally led organizations. How have you been able to do this, and what could others learn from you?
So I think that we've had, some considerable success fundraising. We also have ambitious goals. So it's been always sort of like trying to fundraise, but also needing more to continue growing. I think that one of the things that has made us successful in our fundraising so far has been, first of all, sticking to our mission and ensuring that our mission is very clear to us. For me personally, as a founder of the organization, the mission is very clear to me. So it means that, you don't get distracted by, for example, someone else wanting you to do something else. And so remaining very disciplined about what we're doing and who we're providing to and why we're doing what we're doing and what are the key markers of success. Another thing that has helped in terms of our fundraising journey is also really understanding our key metrics and communicating them well. So from our numbers of kids served to our cost per meal. So ensuring that even for internal operations, we understand them. So we're not, for example, running out of money because we're not tracking that properly, but also that we're able to communicate that. I think the last thing that has really helped is I think fundraising is a form of language in terms of it's an art and a science. But I think it's really a lot about understanding who you're speaking to, what their motivations are, and how those motivations and your mission align. And so something that has been helpful is, when I speak to funders, for example, it will be really useful for me to, first of all, understand them and understand what they're looking for while having a conversation, because I think that alignment is what sometimes misses, but also when it's there, it really means that you're both going in the same direction. So really understanding the language of fundraising and also how do you communicate what you're doing in a way that creates credible metrics for yourself internally and also for the funders to hold you account to as well.
So I have a question. In the science, I suppose you could say it, of funding and sourcing it and working with governments, has there ever been a time when you have rejected funds because you felt that they wanted something else as well?
A couple of times now that we've said no to funding, and mostly it's because there is no alignment. So I mentioned the alignment where it becomes their motivations and your mission aligning and their mission as well. And I think that something that for me is really important is that every party knows what is expected of them. And especially for us to be able to say that we can truly deliver on our commitment. And if our commitment is outside what we want to accomplish, where our vision and mission are, it becomes very difficult to sort of promise that. And so we've said no to some funding just because of that mission alignment wasn't there. or sometimes, the agendas did not, meet and marry. And that is very important for us to be able to make sure that we remain credible to our mission and we're able to deliver on what we promised the funder.
Well, that's very brave and shows tremendous focus on where you're going, because it's quite often very easy to grab the dollars and, in fact, there's too many strings attached. Or not the right strings, that's for sure.
Exactly.
On the flip side of that question, Wawira, have funders ever said no to you before?
Yes, so many times. Yes, I think it's mission alignment. It's usually mostly the mission alignment. Sometimes, we have funders that say no to us because they consider us smaller and they would, for example, be funding bigger organizations. I mean, I understand around that, but I think that if there's a drive towards funding more local organizations, I think funders should be taking investments into local organizations, right? And giving them money to be able to accomplish goals. Because what we've seen is, if, for example, local organizations are termed as small, the only thing that is small is maybe a budget question, but in terms of impact, local organizations have huge impact. They impact so many people in their communities. And so I think that mission alignment and sometimes, sort of being termed as more smaller is one of the key reasons we've been rejected for funding.
I'm just wondering if you have not been able to source some more funds from South Australia or from your contacts over here in Australia, because here you are, a student who's come from Nairobi to Australia, to Adelaide, has worked so well, has got your qualifications, has decided that there is something you can do, and you've gone to feed 35 children, and now it's something like 35,000 meals you provide. Are you able to source any funds from Australia or from Adelaide, and can I help?
I would love if you could help. So we have some funding from Australia, not particularly from South Australia. So the Partners for Equity Group are one of our partners. And so that has been really helpful in terms of helping us to grow, because they funded, for example, our first truck, and they funded also our first trip to India to see the world's largest school feeding program, which is a big motivation for us. But in terms of South Australia, I think there's definitely opportunities to explore that.
Well, I'm going to go over there to WAMAID next year and shake my tin and try and get some people to get some money.
That would be great. That would be really great.
I'll pick up on one thing that you said, Wawira. Some funders considered you small or look at locally led organizations as not having enough impact, but you're feeding 33,000 children a day. Whoa, that's certainly not a small operation. That is impact. And, these kids are learning, they're getting healthier, their parents have got peace of mind, and you're employing the local community. All of that is impact. And John, this is a reminder to us all that locally led organizations are impactful. They could look small, but they are mighty. They are so mighty, and they're creating real transformation and lasting change in their communities. And as we've heard from Wawira, they are able to engage governments much faster than international organizations. They should be the focus of our funding. Wawira, thank you so much for your time today. Now, I have one last question for you. As the UN Person of the Year in Kenya, how are you using this platform?
So one of the things that we're using the platform here in Kenya is we're trying to get more political support for school feeding. We have an election this year, so we're currently in a process of getting school feeding in the election manifestos. So that's, the UN Person of the Year platform is really good to help push that conversation. As the manifestos are being written right now, we hope to see school feeding feature in that, and that's one of the things that we're really pushing for.
Okay, then get the politician, get a camera, get them into the kitchen. There's a good chance.
Exactly.
Yeah, work the system. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Wawira.
Thank you too. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Eve, yet again, you've proven to us that working locally, working in a very focused area has great success. And I've told so many people that story about the large organisation that came to a town, a small little village in Africa and said, why do these women have to walk so far to get water? Let's build a well. They built the well. No one used it. And then when asked, well, the women said, we actually enjoy the conversation that we have to get away from our husbands and our family. We enjoy the walk to go to get the water to come back. And yet again, but if somebody was on site down there saying, let's find out what you need, then we can supply it. Think globally, but act locally. Find out what is needed.
I love that. Think globally, but act locally. John, we cannot transform these communities without partnering with the local leaders, people who have lived experience and are impacted by the problems we are trying to solve. So, you just told Wawira that you were going to help her fundraise in Adelaide. Tell me more about those plans. When do you head off? When do you start?
Well, first I'm going to get a tin, and then I'm going to put your face on the tin, and I'm going to start shaking it, and I'm saying, listen, this town can help kids far away. If it worked for her, it can work for you. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I can't wait to find out who we're going to speak to next, he says, moving along very quickly.
Surprise, surprise. It's going to be another great interview, and I'm looking forward to it.
So Eva Mala, if I wanted to know more and if our listeners want to know more, where can they go? Is there a website?
You can find us on fundingwithtrust.org, or you can go and listen to us on your favorite platform.
Okay, so fundingwithtrust.org, or go to your favourite site to listen to your podcasts. Eve O'Mara, you're a gem, and I thank you so much indeed for bringing so much to us. I'm just here as a casual listener and learning along. You're the expert, but boy, I'm just learning so much more how Funding with Trust is really helping people on the ground do so much for others.
Thank you, John. See you on our next podcast.
Until next time, we'll see you soon. Eve O'Mara, fundingwithtrust.org is the place to go, and we'll catch you next time.